myth, Mr. Suta, which struck me as rather odd: fail fast, fail cheap. So why don't we discuss your opinions on that?
Oh, Sandhya, this is a myth which originated in Silicon Valley. There, money is actually easy to come by. But there's also an approach of saying, hey, if we start something, let's not blow up too much money. Let's, if required, need to move away from it without blowing up a lot. Therefore, we'll take this thing of failing fast and falling cheap. And, to me, that's absurd. I don't think you should ever start a company thinking that it's going to fail. You have to start a company with the intent that it will become profitable, and you will ultimately be able to give an exit to your stakeholders. Now, in order to do that, there's only one prerequisite, which I believe, apart from the fact that you must have a strategy which keeps evolving, but you need to be clear how much cash you're going to need till you break even, and then know that you've got to either have the ability to already bring it in or raise this as you go along. There may be need for a change in strategy. You may have to zoom in or zoom out or completely re-strategize. And one very good example is around the dot-com boom. In India alone, I believe 100 companies came in at the time of the dot-com boom, and Mindtree was one of them. And yet when the dot-com bust came, I would say 98 or 99 went and busted. And Mindtree alone went on, we re-strategized. And we went on to finally do a record-breaking IPO. But the key to all this is that we had enough cash. When I first went to my VCs, they said, hey, why do you need so much money for a services company? I said, no, we do need that money. We do need to plan to create a large company, and we're going to build the organization to create a large company as we start, which means we will burn up cash. Now, therefore, we had a plan for success. I don't think we would have ever thought of failing fast and failing cheap. In fact, coincidentally, I just met a person earlier this evening. I was interviewing for a new role in our company. And when I'm saying company, this one is Happiest Health. And lo and behold, this guy's done two ventures, which are both bust, or the other one is in the process of busting. And when I asked him this, he said, yeah, I told myself I'll give myself 2 years, or I told my family I'll give myself 2 years to try this. And if it works, it's fine. If it doesn't, then I'll go back to the corporate world. No, I think that's the worst way to start a company.
Okay. Peter, one of the myths that we have discussed and at various points we've had differing opinions is about, PowerPoint type presentations, because most people think it's the most boring thing, but you say you use it. So why don't you explain?
There's a phrase about PowerPoint that is a death by 1,000 cuts, right? Death by PowerPoint. And it's said with good reason, because most of the PowerPoint presentations you see take the same form. There'll be a white background, and then there'll be several lines of text. And then the presenter will start presenting in a monotone for 4 hours, and they will bore you to tears, and all you want to do is run away from the room. But that's just a bad use of a wonderful tool. We communicate with images from 50,000 years ago. Cave art is nothing more than a presentation. It's not digital, but it's a presentation using visuals. And that's what this tool, PowerPoint, can do. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you create a PowerPoint to use images to communicate your ideas, then you can say a tremendous amount in a very short period of time. And you can focus your attention on communicating the content rather than reading off the screen. I consider PowerPoint to be the best way to communicate complicated ideas. I agree with Ashok, and it took me a while to understand why we disagreed on a particular area. Ashok says it shouldn't be used in a corporate meeting. He's right, because it's a different type of communication. But if I'm teaching a subject in a workshop or a long keynote, and it's a new idea, then I need to use visuals to capture your attention. And once I capture your attention, I can put anything I wish in front of
Mr. Suta, we've also discussed this topic of loneliness. It's on everybody's mind. We've all been through so much of angst during the pandemic. And in the corporate setting, it can actually make or break a leader. So why don't you tell us a little bit more? Because I know we discussed it at length while we were writing this chapter.
Yeah, Sandhya, I think I must frame your context. It's not about loneliness. The myth that we are demolishing is it's lonely at the top. And the way I see it, I've now been a CEO of a company for more than 40 years. So I do feel I'm really well qualified to comment on this. And I must say that in all of these years, I can't say I've ever felt lonely. So that's one starting point. I'd put this into two groups. One is, I think, the fact that the so-called loneliness is because the buck stops at the CEO. And therefore you feel you're isolated, you have to take the flak when things go wrong. Yes, you do take the flak, but you also get a lot of credit when you take those decisions. And secondly, for many things which many people in your whole organization are doing, also if you do your decision making in a participated way, it doesn't matter if you take the flak when things go wrong. You do know that the whole organization, your board, and others also thought that it was a good decision. Sure, it didn't work out. So I believe if you're there and comfortable in that process, you would never feel lonely at the top. The other aspect is the distance between the leader and the CEO and the rest of the organization. If you're living in an ivory tower, that would certainly be the case. If you think of your team as your extended family, you involve them, you generally care for them, you're building their careers. I think what you will get in turn is tons of goodwill. You get their love and affection, and it lives with you all these years. It leaves you with a warm glow. So it's an opportunity to give, and it's an opportunity to get back. And I look back over the years, there isn't a company of mine where I've not worked in. There may be even companies I worked in 40, 50 years ago in Hyderabad and Shriram Refrigeration. And now all the way through Wipro, Mindtree, Happiest Minds, I keep meeting people who've been working with me as a part of my team, and they come back and tell me, hey, we do remember this particular thing, which we believe we either learned from you or which we participated with you in making it happen. So I could never think of lonely at the top as something I would accept.
Peter, this is another very controversial myth that you busted, which is, which Jack Welch made famous, or rather, I would say infamous: fire the bottom 10%. So why don't you tell us a little bit more?
Jack Welch is a very famous business person, and he has proven that he absolutely knows what he's talking about. And in one of his books, one of his discussions, he points out that a certain portion of your organization, your employees, will be your top performers, the ones who go above and beyond the call of duty. And he's put a number on it, around 20%. He then identified that about 70% of your organization, and notice my emphasis on the about, all of these numbers are fuzzy, they have to be. About 70% of your organization will be the ones who are delivering to your requirements. They're doing the job day in and day out. They're reliable, they're the core. And then, he said, there will be somewhere around 10% of the organization who are underperformers. Now, he could have said, fire the underperformers. But that doesn't have punch and hype to it. So he made it simple, and he said, fire the bottom 10%. And some organizations, unfortunately, took that literally and created an edict to their managers that once a year, you need to fire the bottom 10% of your department. Now, that is catastrophically insane. If I have good performers or great performers, I'm not getting rid of 10% of them just because Jack Welch says so. The other consequences, if you create a culture where no matter what you do, if you fall into the bottom 10% and everybody that there will always be someone in the bottom 10%, no matter how good they are. If you fire good people just because they're hitting this magical number, then you're creating a hostile environment for your people. If he had said, fire the underperformers after you've tried to coach them to be better, it would have been more accurate, but it wouldn't have been as catchy. I have found that notion of firing the bottom 10% to be counter people. It goes against the very heart of who people are. It's brutal. People are not numbers. You need to treat people like people.
Good. I think now we can invite our, Chennai-based panelists to talk about their takeaways from the book. Meera, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So when I first looked at the book, George Bernard Shaw came to mind. He had said, a golden rule is not a golden rule. Golden rule is that there are no golden rules. Okay. So such contradictions exist in different aspects of our life. But what we need to do is what is mentioned in this book. Several people have commented about such contradictions in the past. Okay. For instance, in every truth, the opposite is also true. Ignorance is bliss versus knowledge is power. Okay. There's no such thing as free lunch, contradicting the best things in life are free. Okay. So it's important for all of us to recognize that there are contradictions. We need to acknowledge these contradictions, but we need to explore more about these contradictions and use them in the right context. Okay. So Mr. Suta and other co-authors, Peter and Sandhya, who are there with us today, have actually explored these myths in a very different way. Now, what are myths? For many of you, what are myths? They're actually narratives which are stubborn and which are memorable. They leave an everlasting impact. And how do you bust these myths? You need to come out with another narrative which is even more memorable. So what did the authors do in this book? They actually used logic. They used their real life experiences in the business world, and they explored these myths. In the beginning, they listed a number of myths, which itself is useful and commendable for all of us. Apart from that, they used several examples and made the reader think and arrive at a conclusion. Now, several of these myths listed here resonate very well with me. Now, I'll take one myth and talk from my experience. Okay, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I was a part of the founding team of National Commodities and Derivatives Exchange in 2003. Till 2003, the commodity trading in industry in India was largely unorganized. There were few dominant players, and it was not transparent. So the objective of creating National Commodities and Derivatives Exchange was to offer transparent trading mechanisms for price risk management of agricultural commodities and other commodities. Given this industry context, the organization's objective, management felt that they should create a culture which was open and transparent. And importance was given primarily to integrity, open communication, and education of not only the employees, but also the customers. Given this industry context and the objective and the values that the organization had, several strategies were created. For instance, it was important not only to educate the customers of National Commodities and Derivatives Exchange about the benefits of trading on commodity derivatives, but they also needed to be apprised of the risks that were there in the system. So what is mentioned is they're trying to bust the myth culture eats strategy for breakfast. So for any organization to be successful, both culture and strategy are equally important. Yeah.
Well said, well said. Ravichandran.
Thank you for having me on this panel. So I will give you a little bit of background. I come from a manufacturing sector, and I've spent quite a bit of time in building businesses, both inside and outside India. And when I got the opportunity to read the book, I couldn't agree more to what was narrated in the book. I will kind of share some of my thoughts, as there's been a lot of talk about fail fast, fail cheap. Let me take that one first. In around 1999, we acquired a startup company, which was actually headquartered in Melbourne, which relocated to Toronto. And this company had oil-free technology. In the air conditioning business, oil-free was something unheard of, because oil is one of the lubricating force in a chiller, actually. And we believe that this is going to be the future of compressor technology. And we picked up the startup on a 50-50 joint venture, and took quite a bit of years to commercialize the product. The product took almost 10 years to get out to the market. But as rightly mentioned by Mr. Ashok Soota, I think we had enough cash in the reserves to really fuel the business, because our founder believed in the technology. Today, when the world is talking about ESG, when the world is talking about circularity, this product is 99% circular, which means 99% of the parts are recyclable, actually. So if we simply went by the myth of fail cheap, fail fast, we wouldn't be today leading the market with this technology. I mean, this is one of the examples I wanted to tell you all. But again, it is important. Yeah. It is important for us to recognize that, when you look at these kind of myths, there are probably narratives which are used in certain situations, but they don't really apply to most of the situations. Let me pick the other one. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, actually. It's very often used, largely coming from Ford Motors. When you meet anyone from Ford Motors in the early days, this was kind of a common terminology that they used to spell out when you meet them as well. I think, to me, culture is very important for any organization. If I take my organization, there's a 90-year-old family-run business. Culture is, the DNA of the company. It kind of reverberates with the DNA as well as the purpose of why the company was formed. So it's going to be everlasting in the enterprise, what the founders thought about the original vision for the company. That's the real core of the company, and of course, we don't make too many changes to the culture, but we make some adaptations based on how the environment changes. Whereas strategy is very different. Strategy is you adapt, to the external world in terms of how you plan your growth. What is that? Where do you want to play? How do you want to win? So it's a very different dynamics, and you don't too much tinker with the culture, but you kind of tinker with the strategy, actually. But you need both to be combined if you want to execute perfectly as well. So therefore, this myth of culture eats strategy for breakfast is probably applicable for Peter Drucker, but not for companies like us, because we haven't really, it's kind of a connotation that has been used very often, more from the American world, but being a European company, we have never used it. So for me, I don't really buy to the argument, because culture and strategy are very important for any enterprise. Because even after 90 years, what was the values and the founder had established, which is kind of the underlying behavior, right? For example, we have three behaviors, frontline passion. So the founder said, do what matters most for your customers, right? And every employee should run the business like your own, how you spend your money, how you spend resources. Yeah. Third is think about the company first before you think about the business and yourself, actually. So these are all very simple value systems, which actually is anchored for having the right behavior for the business, actually. So I think these are two different things, is my perspective, which I wanted to share with you all.
I think it's really heartening to know, the myths and the way we have brought it out has resonated with you. I'm going to ask the next 2-3 questions to all 4 of you. Okay, and you can choose who wants to go first. Shall we start with Peter? Which of the myths you busted present the most pressing challenge for industry practitioners today?
I'm very biased. My background is change management. And the biggest challenge we're facing is this belief that people resist change. No, they don't. They resist being changed. If you can get your people to desire a change, and there are techniques for doing that, you cannot hold them back. If you believe that people will always resist change, you will not be able to move them forward.
Mr. Sutta?
Yeah, is it the same question? Or?
Yeah, it's the same question.
Well, I'll tell you, I think the most important, as we hear from my angle, and it's partly in this context of the new world that we're in, is Michael Porter's statement of saying that the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And Michael Porter's whole reasoning is that there has to be a trade-off. You can't do everything. So if you say yes to something, you must say no to the other. Now, I really don't agree with this at all, because I believe, like a venture capitalist, I would say that if you have a good idea, then you have to find a means of funding it. That's one part of it. Second part, so there don't have to be trade-offs. And the second, and I think the most important part in that is that the errors of omission are much larger and much more expensive than the errors of commission, because you don't even know what you lost. And a good example of that is when Bill Gates was asked, what is the biggest mistake you made in your life? So he said, I didn't do Android. Here was the guy who owned the operating system world. And he really, at least he realized years later that he missed that opportunity. And the moment you get into that mindset, you don't know what you're going to miss. So I think that's a really critical one. There's another angle to this, which is really relevant in today's day and age more than perhaps when Michael Porter wrote it. We're in an intensely hyper-competitive world. Everybody has got to have a stake in everybody else's place. Otherwise, you don't know where they will come and wipe you out. Another good example from Microsoft and Google. For how many years has Google completely dominated search? Yet Microsoft never let go. They're there, hanging on. And suddenly a new change of technology, generative AI, has made them another major player into the space. So you've got to keep your options open. The third angle, which I think needs to be brought in, is today we are developing our businesses increasingly, which run off platforms. You make money while you sleep, and the platform brings the buyer and the seller together. In that context, you can do much more than you could have thought of doing in the past. So I do believe that that's one particular, let's say, myth from a very, very reputed person, which I believe never was correct. And now it completely does not stand the test of time.
I think I'll move on to the next question. Meera, in today's startup economy, since you're on, a board member and you're a management consultant yourself, I thought you best suited to answer this. What are the red flags for Indian companies while scaling up?
In my view, the founder, the founding team, they are the biggest asset for a startup, and they can also be the biggest liability. And most important factor for the startup while scaling up is the founder and the founding team themselves, their vision, their passion, their mindset, and the capability. In fact, in one of the startups that we had invested in, There were severe differences of opinion between both the co-founders, so much so that the complete enterprise was brought to a standstill. None of the investors could do anything about it. Now, if it's a single founder startup, then we normally, as a business mentor and as an investor, we normally advise the startup founder to look for another founder who has the same vision and alignment, but with complementary skill set. So in my view, the founder and the founding team, their capability, their mindset, it's of primal importance. Second is the financial sustainability of the startup and the funding capabilities of the organization. Third, in my view, is the team retention and team availability, talent retention and talent availability. How much talent is available for the startup in the system, and how can they retain the talent that they have acquired already? In my view, these three are the most important and pressing points. Of course, we can rattle off many, but yeah, due to time constraint, I would put these as 1, 2, and 3.
I think I'm going to ask Peter to respond to her observations because I knew your brain was ticking as you were listening to her. Can you reference it to the book?
I can't relate it to the book, but the notion of a founder, someone who starts a company, has a particular mindset about delivering something new to the market. And that is where their passion is. They may not have the ability to run a larger company. They're the creative force, the early adopter, the innovator, but they're not the one who can manage the growth of a company. Those are different skill sets. And to expect the original founder to be able to take it all through the entire cycle is asking a tremendous amount. Now, every now and then, along comes a superstar, and we have one as the lead author in this book. Ashok Sutya does it all, and I am in awe of the man, and I am delighted to have been a part of this project.
All right. I would like to ask you, when you read this book, did it make you re-examine your beliefs and assumptions? And did it cause you to change any of your beliefs?
Well, when I got a chance to read the book, what resonated me was what actually I felt was that the way the book has been articulating some of these myths with practical, experiences from leaders, it kind of very nicely resonated with me. Why we should not just blindly believe these myths. And for somebody who has been dealing with people as a daily part of my career, quite a lot of stuff, what I've read in the book was spot on, in my view. And it was also easy to follow, that's where I felt I could easily connect the book and, the 110 odd pages, I could actually read in 3 hours. It's not very easy. So, I was also fascinated by a lot that was mentioned, by Sandeep Maini as well, because he's probably from a manufacturing background and it very well resonated with us. I just pick one, for example, people leave because of their bosses, that's really not true. Actually, people leave because probably for several other reasons, So these are all things which, it was like a real life experience for me reading the book.
Okay, so I think now we can move on to the rapid fire round. I know originally I'd said I would only ask Mr. Suta and Peter, but I think I'm going to make it a little more challenging and throw some questions to both of you. Are you game?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Peter, sum up management in a nutshell.
Managers maintain the status quo, leaders change the status quo. And as Ashok has said repeatedly, you can't do just one. You have to have some skills in both areas. Otherwise, you're handicapped. And this is the short.
Yeah,
thing.
I have a problem with Peter. He does not know how to answer anything in one sentence, you know? All right. Mr. Sutta, which of the 17 myths in the book annoys you the most?
I've actually covered them, but let me take a new one since it hasn't come up. Now, that's just a
Okay.
prelude. And the one is about hiring people smarter than yourself. And the reason is it's too simplistic. It doesn't take into account things like multiple intelligences. And you're not, and the last time this happened to anybody is when Steve Jobs hired Peter Scully and lost his job.
Yeah, we can't have that, can we? Okay. I can ask you this, some of the difference between leadership and management.
Yeah, I think leadership is setting the direction for the company and making people believe in what the purpose of the company and is to really articulate that to the organization. So that really is the role of leadership. I think managing is more, empowering, empowering and providing them enough capital and giving them the opportunity to, realize their full potential. That is for me management. But in all of whether you want to be a good leader or whether you want to be a good manager, I think curiosity is a very important piece. Curiosity, purpose, and empathy and humility. These are very important characters for being both a good manager and a good leader, actually. So I think it's two sides of the same coin, in my view. But again, you need to build strong teams to really make this happen
Right.
and really empower them, actually. So.
Thank you. You are a management consultant yourself. So which do you think is the most common management issue that you've come across?
One is people leave people, but not organizations.
Okay.
Okay. So I can quote from my own example. I mean, an example that I've experienced. I was associated with a large conservative business group in India, and I was the executive coach for a senior woman leader. She had joined the organization. She was 3 years into the organization, and she was reporting directly to the CEO. The CEO had just changed. The earlier CEO had retired. A new CEO had taken over. And the new CEO was slightly autocratic. He would humiliate her, be judgmental, be critical, and would make fun of her in public. And she was quite annoyed by the whole situation. She wanted to leave the organization. She was actually contemplating on leaving the organization. But 2 years into the organization, she actually discovered, that is during the executive coaching, she told me, that 2 years into the organization, she discovered that though she was very well qualified and experienced, she was taken at a lower pay scale as compared to her peers. Okay. And she was also denied a promotion. So though the company and the group bragged about diversity, inclusion, and equality, in reality, they were not practicing it. They were not used to having senior women leaders in both their group and the organization. So when she was contemplating leaving, now what should we blame? Should we blame leadership or should we blame the group and their culture? That's a good thought.
Okay.
So it's important that organizations don't take the easy path and blame leaders, but they look, introspect, and understand what are the underlying reasons that create such leaders.
All right. So they should attend Peter's management workshop, I think.
Yeah.
In fact, Peter, coming to that topic, you've been conducting workshops in India. You've done on change management, and you are doing a new one created based on this book. So do you customize your workshops according to the country and culture?
The short answer, I guess, is yes. But the way I do it is different than what most people expect. I don't worry about the culture and I don't worry about the company. When I start giving a course, the only thing that's important to me is how do I meet the needs of the people in the room at the time? Everything else is secondary. And the way I find that out is I do something very, very radical. I ask each individual in the room, what do you want from the course today? I cheat. If I ask you what you want, and then I give you what you want, at the end of the day, you leave and you go, I got exactly what I wanted. And that's almost cheating. I could talk all day, as you well know, but if I'm not meeting your personal needs, I'm not serving you as an attendee in the room. So that's how I do, that's how I answer what you asked. I speak to the individual.
Okay. Mr. Sudha, do you have any other remarks to make before we move to the Q&A?
Well, let me take one of the myths which hasn't come up at all, and that is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, if you look at today's world, the world is changing so rapidly. If you wait for things to go wrong before you begin to fix things, then you're going to be swept out of business very soon. You have to be proactive. You've got to go and break it if required. You've got to anticipate where things are going to change and lead the company in that direction, rather than waiting for saying, hey, everything is going well, so let's coast along and go along. And I think that's another important thing about not just letting things remain in a status quo and questioning the status quo.
Wonderful.
Just wanted to add one point here, I went to a company and asked them, how often do you redesign your platform? It was a car company, and they said we do it in about once in 10 years. I went to another company and asked them, how often do you redesign the platform? They said they do it in 2 years. So I think you can see that the world is changing so fast, and no wonder the company which was redesigning platform every 2 years was having a market share of 60%. And the company which was redesigning a platform every 10 years was having a market share of 2%.
Yeah, which is what I noticed in, in this rush to build EV vehicles. The legacy players are the ones lagging behind because it's going to take them that much longer to build rebuild what they already have. Whereas for new players, it's much easier.
I just wanted to connect with this famous saying of companies have to decide what not to do. But here is an example. Companies have decided to do where to play, how to win.
That's good.
Sure.
So shall I move on to the questions now? We seem to have quite a lot of questions coming in from people online also, which have been faithfully noted down and given to me. So let's start with Matthew, who's asked this question from Mysore. What inspired the three of you to write this book? And what motivated you to debunk management myths specifically? I think Mr. Sudha should start the answer.
Yeah, well, I did explain this in a way in the very beginning in my opening remarks, because there were certain things which to my mind were actually dangerous if you accepted them at face value, because they could lead you into erroneous decision making. You could get complacent in the process of saying, hey, if it ain't broke, for example, don't fix it. No, you do need to be proactive and make that change. And therefore, there were a lot of things which caused me a lot of angst. We've discussed culture is strategy for breakfast. I believe in the complete importance of culture. There's no question. I would imagine, take a lot of pride in the culture I've created in all the organizations, or we've created in our organizations. And yet I would never say to eat strategy for breakfast. So I really had to get that point of view across. And that is how I particularly selected the myths that I chose, and the ones which Peter chose too later on resonated with me. So I think that's really the fundamental process, but both you and Peter may want to add something to the question, since it's really addressed to all of us.
Peter?
I'll make it short to make up for the earlier long thing during the short session. I chose the things that irritated me most in business beliefs, which I had something that I thought would be useful to say. And that's how the primary selection began. And then what we did, as Ashok had just said, We tried to find the overlap, the ones that irritated both of us, that we had something to say. And those are the ones we went after first.
Actually, as Ravichandar kindly pointed out, the answer to this question is actually there in the first page of the book. So you could read that, Matthew, if you're, watching this. But if you ask me, I didn't choose the topic. The book was halfway complete when I was co-opted as also an author. So I just went along, did my job and completed it. But along the way, I did have some amount of contribution, especially I think in the last 3 or 4 myths that were chosen. I had my say about which seemed more interesting than the others. The next one, I think some of this question, I mean, it's a 2-part question. Some of it has already been answered. What role does leadership play in the process of debunking management myths, and how can leaders encourage their teams to question established practices? I think we can answer the second part. How to develop this culture of questioning established practices within the organization? Mr. Sutta?
Well, I think the first thing is to be clear that there has to be an open environment. There has to be an environment which encourages such questions. And certainly there's to be no fear. I think in all of the companies that I have run, we have really regular communication sessions. And the one thing we keep emphasizing to everybody, that there are no holds barred. You can ask any question you want and we will answer it. And certainly you can ask the most awkward questions from which you feel management may actually find difficult to answer, and they will get answered. And once you establish that rhythm and that belief, and everybody realizes that anybody who asks that so-called difficult question is not going to get punished, but maybe rewarded for it, it completely ensures that you won't have that sort of a problem.